Just before we get started with today's video, guess what? It's brought to you by Beard Blaze. Some of you might have heard this before. I've got another channel called Business Blaze, and that channel actually led to the development of this very product. A fan of that channel called Will, he wrote to me and he was like, Simon, you should make some beard oils. Actually, it was a bit of a longer story. I made a joke about YouTubers having beauty lines, and he said, don't do that, Whistle, but do this. And so we made a range of beard oils, which are fantastic. You get them at beardblaze.com. There's a couple of things we solved. We just made them super high quality and super good. I tested them all out. I rubbed them in my beard like some sort of lab rat. And then we made them in decent sized bottles for a fair price, because whenever I bought beard oil before, which kind of keeps your beard soft and nice and all of that stuff, they were super expensive and they came in tiny bottles. So we made them cheaper and in a big bottle. How about that? It wasn't that complicated. Beardblaze.com, check it out. According to the American general John J. Pershing, the deadliest weapon on Earth is a US Marine and his rifle. Well, honestly, I mean, no disrespect to the Marines, but he never met a nuclear weapon, did he? Well, what about a US Marine in a big tank that can swim? That sounds pretty scary, right? Well, not really. Actually, if the tank is an expensive piece of crap, it can easily be taken out by missiles and is basically the poster child for everything wrong with the military-industrial complex. And believe me, there is an awful lot wrong with the military-industrial complex. This is the story of the Expeditionary fighting vehicle, the mistake that cost the Marine Corps, wait for it, $3.3 billion. As you might have guessed, the primary purpose of Marines, at least originally, is to perform amphibious landings, like the kind at Normandy or in the Pacific during World War II. But the thing about amphibious landings is that they kind of suck, and they suck really bad. So to make things at least a little easier, development began during World War II for armored vehicles that could be deployed at sea, which would then be capable of reaching land and taking on the role of frontline combat. And this actually resulted in some rather capable designs, notably the landing vehicle tracked. No, that's not a mistake. They really called it that name, or the LVT. This design and its variants were often nicknamed Amtraks, short for amphibious track, and any proper tanks that were redesigned to be amphibious were nicknamed Amtanks. Not incredibly original, but you can't argue with the results. With all of that in mind, our actual story begins in the 1980s, when the Marine Corps found itself with a bit of a dilemma. Their current Amtrak vehicle, the LVTP-7, known as the Assault Amphibious Vehicle, again, that's not a mistake, that's the actual name. Why can't they just name it with the words in the correct order? I don't know. Well, it was getting a bit long in the tooth, so they paid a company by the name of General Dynamics to design a replacement with some very specific goals in mind. You see, the Marine Corps had come up with a new strategy for amphibious assaults termed Over the Horizon. Under this strategy, assaults would be capable of being launched from, well, you can guess it, over the horizon. As it stood, the ships launching the assault had to get quite close to the shore to do so, as in within range of being shot at. As such, the intention behind this new strategy was to keep those ships safe from enemy mines or shore defenses. That is a really good idea. So this brings us to the actual design of the EFV. It was to be a fully tracked armored infantry combat vehicle with a crew of 3 Marines to operate it and capable of carrying up to 17 more beyond that. It was to be able to move up to 20 knots while in the water and about 3 times faster than the AAV, and up to 45 kilometers an hour, that's 28 miles per hour on land. In keeping with the over-the-horizon strategy, the EFV would be capable of being launched up to 25 miles from the shore. To put that in perspective, the AAV could, and still can, only be launched 2 miles from the shore. Beyond that, it was to have about twice the armor of the AAV, making this a seriously powerful vehicle. Right? The program for the EFV officially began in 1988. Prototypes of the design had begun as far back as 1974, but this was the real official, yes, we are now going to throw millions of dollars at it moment. Initially, the project seemed to be going rather well, earning 2 Department of Defense awards in 1995 for successful cost and technology management. That proved just a touch premature, as not long after that it became clear that the program was not going to pan out exactly how they had hoped. The first problem came with the overarching design. The strategy of over-the-horizon assaults was rendered rather obsolete by further development of the most pesky military technology of all time, the missile. Bit of a spoiler here, but in an official document discussing the EFV's cancellation, did you know that was coming, the development of long-range anti-ship cruise missiles was specifically cited as one of the primary reasons for why the project was cancelled. Beyond that are the problems that anyone who's had a good look at failed military-industrial complex projects would be familiar with. So, well, if you're a regular viewer of this channel. And what are those problems? Well, look, they're always behind schedule, and they're always way over budget, aren't they? Now, this isn't a complete disaster for a military project. The F-35 fighter program was behind schedule and over budget too, but the primary difference between the F-35 and the EFV was that, well, the F-35, it actually works. In 2001, the project entered the systems development and demonstration phase, which is a fancy way of saying it was ready for its beta test. The SDD phase was originally slated to take around 2 years, which was later described as too ambitious. That was the kind way of describing it, as a report by the Government Accountability Office later said that the program did not allow enough time to demonstrate maturity of the EFV design. The original schedule did not allow adequate time for testing, evaluating the results, fixing the problems, and retesting to make sure that problems are fixed before moving forward. So we'll just move on to list a few of those problems. In late 2004, during testing, the main computer system failed in several prototypes, which knocked out the steering and made the vehicle dead in the water. There were problems with everything, ranging from hull leaks to hydraulics to bow flaps. Basically, it was a mobile Murphy's Law at high speed. The program was re-baselined, that is to say, it was pushed back no less than 3 times during this period until in 2006, when it was finally subject to an operational assessment. Basically, a final exam, which it failed spectacularally. The vehicle failed 9 of the 11 amphibious tests, 9 of the 10 gunnery tests, and all 3 of the land mobility tests. It did nothing. It was useless. What's more, the EFE needed about 3.4 hours of maintenance for every 1 hour of operation, and only managed to operate for about 4.5 hours before breaking down. There were also problems with limited visibility and reloading the main gun, but those were honestly small potatoes in the face of such a catastrophic failure. The fact that the main gun doesn't work, being a small problem, speaks volumes, doesn't it? The test went so poorly that the Marines actually issued a request to industry leaders for information on tracked combat vehicles that can provide an alternative design concept of the EFV, which was interpreted as the Marines saying to General Dynamics, "You screwed this up so badly that we need to bring in outside help to try and salvage this piece of shit that you made." So yeah, if you ever felt bad about a low test score that you got in school, at least you weren't a military contractor scoring 3 out of 24. The program basically went completely back to the start of the process. The entire vehicle was redesigned, and it was ultimately decided that the entire SDD phase would be repeated again. This put the entire program a total of 8 years behind schedule in what some call the largest program setback. And that, of course, was assuming that the new testing worked out. And as it turned out, it actually did. The new design saw major improvements in reliability, fixing the most obvious problems, and the new tests showed some promising results. For a moment, it seemed like this new design might actually be used. But then in 2008, Obama happened. Obama actually didn't have very much to do with what happened to the EFV project. He was rather busy stressing out about the collapsing financial sector at the time, but a number of his appointed staff did. Specifically a man by the name of Robert O'Rourke, the Undersecretary of the Navy, who said in 2010 that the future of amphibious warfare would work out to one of 2 things. Either the Marines would land unopposed, or the resistance on the shore would be so fierce that it would require the US military to throw basically everything it had at them to clear a path. Neither of these options really had a place for the EFV. Even the new updated design wasn't perfect. It had a flat underside, making it vulnerable to improvised explosive devices, and creating something to fix that would have required redesigning the entire vehicle again. What's more, the aforementioned missile problem had become very apparent, and there was really nothing they could do about it. Ultimately, the cost of the EFV became more trouble than it was worth, and the project was cancelled in January of 2011 at the recommendations of the Navy and the Marine Corps. Speaking about the cancellation, Defense Secretary Robert Gates said this: "To be sure, the EFV would, if pursued to completion without regard to time or cost, be an enormously capable vehicle. However, recent analysis suggests that the most plausible scenarios requiring power projection from the sea could be handled through a mix of existing air and sea systems employed in new ways, scenarios that do not require the exquisite features of the EFV." So ultimately, the EFV was dead some 40 years after the idea had first been floated, and almost 30 since it was put into practice. But do you want to know the worst part of all of this? The part that just makes you really shake your head in disbelief. The AAV, the vehicle that the EFE was supposed to replace, it's still in use. That's right, the Marine Corps extended the lifespan of the vehicle multiple times and retrofitted it to be more modern, and that vehicle is still the primary landing craft for the US Marines. So yeah, if they'd actually have done absolutely nothing with this vehicle, they'd be ahead. Brilliant work. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.